amazing. Thank you so much.
Right, yeah. No, I look very bland today, but I did bring a picture of my my honk get-up.
Oh, ooh, exciting.
Just for the record.
Amazing.
The German band took that picture this year. They were in my house.
How many people ended up staying in your house?
6.
Okay. I feel like that's an exciting...
Oh, yeah, no, I always host about half of, usually an international band, because we're pretty international in my house, can speak languages and stuff.
Oh, nice. What sort of languages do you speak in your house?
German, Italian, French.
That is a very international...
Some Spanish and Portuguese.
Amazing. Fancy stuff. I'm sure it sounds good.
Okay.
Every other going to go for academic purposes, just been like in a coffee shop and recorded on my phone. So this is well, right on. This is a step up.
Yeah. This is like when I do the television shows.
Right. This is a neat space. They do a lot of really cool stuff here too. Oh, you can see yourself.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I know, that's distracting.
Yeah, let me know if that's distracting or.
I don't know. A little bit, maybe. I don't know. I don't need to see myself.
There you go.
What am I going to do? Like, try to... It's like,
Just, yeah.
what?
Yeah, some people really like it. Some people have a strong aversion to it. So
Yeah, neither the one nor the other, but it is a little distracting. It's sort of like, I don't want to keep looking up there. It's not the right look. Yeah, that's probably better. Yeah. I used to do radio. Radio was easier that way.
Yeah, it is.
We had an NPR station in Madison, Wisconsin.
You're in Wisconsin for a little bit?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I'm from North Dakota, so
Okay.
The
Yeah. Yeah. No, we had a great radio station. I was a news announcer, and I had a radio, like music show too.
Oh, nice.
So I have a radio operator's license still.
You need a license to operate a radio?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was one of the operators, or whatever we called ourselves.
Official guys.
Yeah.
all right, we are all
Back
set.
in the day.
Amazing.
So I'm just gonna scoot out. I'm just gonna make sure the cameras are just gonna take one final look at the framing, and then I'm gonna give you a thumbs up. You may not be able to see me, but then you're good to go. Okay.
I mean, I can see myself anyway, but that's better. See, I'm looking at myself rather than looking up.
There you go.
It's up there.
We have another shoot that's happening over here that's just a little bit more hands-on. So
Okay.
feel free to come, sort of out and let us know if you need any help with anything.
Perfect.
It is with a few faculty members. So if you are exiting and you're having a wonderful conversation, maybe just try to
Keep it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm just gonna start recording. That'll just make my life a lot easier on the
Yeah.
tail end. Yeah, can you even see anything? Can you let me know when you get the thumbs up? Okay, or if you can see anything?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay.
I have to focus at the right depth. That's all. Yeah, thumbs up.
Okay, amazing, great. So yeah, thank you so much, first of all, for agreeing to come here.
Sure.
So this is for an oral history of the HONK Festival. So pretty much we just want to hear your story about how you got involved, sort of what it means to you, how it's evolved, kind of like what you think maybe music's role in it is versus activism's role, and just sort of a like broad picture of what like HONK means to one of the organizers. So can you start off just by telling me a little bit about how you got involved with HONK?
Well, sure. I think that it's a way it's kind of magical because when I was a kid, when I was like 4, 5, 6 years old, for some reason I had this fantasy that every time we went on a trip with my parents, we would arrive at a place and there'd be a brass band waiting for us, like playing to welcome us. I don't know why I had that fantasy, but I did. It was a very visceral one, like even going to see my grandparents or going to see, going to, Montreal for a vacation. You say, when we get there, there'll be a brass band there. That's what I always thought in my head. Maybe my parents used to say something about it. But anyway, of course, there never was a brass band waiting for us when we arrived. I mean, there might be a brass band in a parade, but there wasn't a brass band waiting for us. Until the first year of HONK, I walked into Davis Square. Some people had told me it was coming, and I'd actually didn't zero in on it for some reason. I walked into the square and there was a brass band, playing a Spanish Civil War song that I love, the Brass Liberation Orchestra from the Bay Area in California, as it turned out. I didn't know. I just walked in and I felt like I finally arrived at that destination. I mean, it was so moving that I literally wept. I was like, I'm here.
It's like, this is what I've always dreamed about.
I finally got there.
Really? Okay, so you weren't involved in the initial.
Not the first one, no. I got involved right after that.
There you go.
And I have the experiences that are somewhat relevant. I mean, the first one was done just by the band members in the second line band here. Mm-hmm. Then I was one of the first people who was not a band member, but had more background in theater and organizing. I mean, I had a training in theater, but then I went into activism instead. I'm a union. Labor union director here in Massachusetts for the Service Employees International Union. So, and that's a very theatrical job. I mean, and music was what was missing from that always. So, we brought music into all our work after that at the union. All these bands playing at our rallies, at our doing flash mobs at striking stores and things. Really exciting stuff. But the origin is very personal for me. I mean, it really is something magical to me. It was what I was always waiting for. And then I found it. And another person said to me one time, I said something about, they said, is HONK happening this year? This was maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago. This is somebody I didn't even know. Mm-hmm. I mean, they just saw something about HONK. They said, is HONK happening this year? I said, yes. They said, oh, good, because that's my high holy days. And I said, well, it's my high holy days, too. I really thought that captured it. It's the... it's like the one really ritual moment of the year where you really do something authentic, but deeply different than the norm. You know what I mean? You really break out of the norm. And I think that's incredibly important. I mean, it's important on a lot of levels. The music is incredible. The basic idea is a HONK band is acoustic. Not strictly, but almost entirely acoustic. But it has to be loud because it's out in the street, so it has to be brass and drums, maybe an accordion, maybe something else. But it has to have that. When people sing, they sing just through a megaphone, like we do at work in the union. We talk through a megaphone. We have the same tools of the trade, and it's street level. It's audience level. It's not up on a stage. I mean, occasionally we perform on a stage, just to show off what the bands do, But the real performance is Saturday in Davis Square, where the bands are mixed in with the crowd practically. They're on the crowd's level, and the crowd often even interacts with the band. And that's very important. It's very participatory. It's really a community of the bands and their audience. And the audience is full of band members too, because, at the festival we're bringing bands from all over the country and even all over the world. So, there's quite a culture of this. Of course, it's a culture we're tapping into that's very old. You go to a little village in almost anywhere in the world that's very traditional, and there's a band. It's usually a brass band, and they're playing, music like we do too, for all generations. You'll hear songs at the HONK Festival from, the 19th century, from the 1920s, from the 1930s, from the 1950s, from the latest hits. People are drawing their music from the whole tradition of music and the international traditions. Eastern Europe. Celtic music, the Mediterranean, the Arabic culture, African culture. They all have that brass and music culture. And, of course, New Orleans is the sort of archetype of it all. That's, the kind of second-line culture, which is amateur bands who are not the first line, they're the second line. They're the ones that, because everybody has music culture in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And everybody should have music culture.
Absolutely. How do you describe HONK to someone who's maybe never heard of it and is just...
Well, the first thing you say, it is a festival of activist street bands, or activist brass bands, if you want to emphasize that, although not all of them are strictly brass. There's some drumming groups that drum like in Rio in Brazil, that style of street music. But, the basic idea is that it's a festival that is just bands playing all day, people interacting with the bands all day, the parade, through from Davis down to Harvard, then playing in Harvard Square on Sunday. It's a chance to just really have a festival. Really dance in the streets, It's dancing in the streets. That's to me is almost the most basic thing you can say about it. But I mean, it's activist too. There's political content of all kinds, issue content. This year the theme was everybody needs a home. We need affordable housing. Immigrants need, a place to come to or their home itself preserved. And we need a planet we can live in. So it sort of tied together the immigration issue, the economic justice issue, and the environmental issue in one theme. So we do a lot with that. And of course, the bands, when they're not playing at the festival, they may be playing for community events. That's a kind of politics too, just building community. But they also, a lot of them play in protest marches and things all over the world. They're active in politics. One of the things we do is, in fact, one of the most moving things for the German band this year, they said, but it's always moving for people who do it, is to play at the ICE detention center for the people who are detained there. And, they come to the gated bars and wave to the people, because they're so glad to see people there supporting them, showing solidarity with them. They said it was just amazing. They said they're going to go back to Germany and play at the detention center for refugees there.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, so it's very important. But it has another aspect, too, which is that it's also a kind of a bacchanal. I mean, I do think that one thing that, has always troubled me anyway, troubled my parents before me because they were very active politically, too, is that, there is a side of human nature that's very negative. It's very aggressive, that even left-wing people can commit terrible crimes, as we've seen. And, nobody's immune to that if you've lived through the 20th century. And there, to get at the root of that is very interesting to me. And one way to get to the root of it is like what Georges Bataille wrote about in the 20th century, the French philosopher. He said that why is it that we are so aggressive? Why do we want to make a bonfire of our resources, like global warming? Right? I mean, he said that in the 1960s already. And he said, well, that's something very deep in us. And there's two ways to approach it. You can either repress it and say, everybody be civil, everybody be nice, everybody be, Or he said you can find the productive way to engage with it, which is to bring it out as something joyful, like carnival, something that is a release of all that energy that's positive rather than violent. So, rather than try to suppress it and say, don't be bad, don't, in other words, being moralistic about it, he said, why don't we embrace it in a positive way, and the traditional cultures have that. That's why they have festivals and sort of days where you can dress up in costume and be different, and sort of be mischievous and wild. And I think that's part of what HONK is about, is being positively kind of wild. It's wildness, as they used to say, not just wilderness, but wildness.
Yeah.
We are creatures of the wilderness originally, and we need a little disruption. But in a music makes it a joyful thing. It's not it's a positive thing, and I think that side of it is very profound and interesting and very satisfying for people.
Yeah, I mean, how do you what is music's role in HONK versus what is activism's role in HONK? Do they have their own sort of roles, or is it just kind of this one?
Well, I think for us they're united. I mean, it's like Emma Goldman, the anarchist, woman anarchist from the turn of the last century, said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. Meaning, that music and progressive change should be they go together, right?
Yeah.
It's about freeing the musical in us. It's about freeing the artistic in us, the theater in us. And I think that's all very positive. I do think that a lot of people come just to hear the music, and that's good too. We joke a lot about, a lot of people even argue about whether we should be playing at Harvard Square for Oktoberfest, because our festival is completely non-commercial. Yeah. And that's what we take pride in. I mean, there's almost no money transaction at HONK. All the bands are hosted by local families for free. All the food is donated from local restaurants and people who cook it and so on. So it's and we don't allow any advertising or corporate sponsorship. When we go into Harvard Square on Sunday for the Oktoberfest piece of it, of course, there's a lot of corporate advertising and stuff, and it's a business kind of festival. And so a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't even be there. And my daughter put it best, I thought. She said, but it's an intervention. that was all I needed to hear.
Absolutely. Something's getting teared up from the inside.
Yeah, you go right into the middle of it, and we've done incredible actions at Harvard. When Harvard was on strike, the food workers, food service workers were on strike. Yeah. Well, it's pouring rain. We marched through the whole parade in a downpour. We got here, and I already had set aside the Marseille band from Marseille, France, was going to be the ones who led the strikers. And the strikers, 300 of them, came out and met us right at the beginning of the square near the Common. And we just marched all through the campus, and all around the festival, chanting about the strike. It was incredibly powerful. The rain pouring down on us, everybody, in ponchos, and the band playing with, ponchos over their brass instruments and stuff. It was one of the most powerful actions I've ever been at. It was really inspiring. So going there and having tens of thousands of people who only say, "Oh, music, great," and then hear what the music is and see how it interacts with other things and see the freedom of it and everything, the wildness of it, is very liberating. And also that it's wild, and yet it also, it bucks all our ideas of wildness. See, there's no electronics, there's no power. The power is human power. There's no, it's not. We're not tapping into the standing reserve. We're off the grid.
Absolutely.
The way we always were. I mean, we have human energy. That's why we say we're liberating the streets for bikes, feet, and bands. Because the streets are for cars normally. When we're performing, they're for people. And for things like one of the bands is called the Rude Mechanical Orchestra. And they have a whole rap about what mechanical, they're like mechanical is something human-driven, but it's a machine, like the instruments. The instruments are all machines. The accordion, they're very complicated, the saxophone, they're complicated machines, but they're powered by human beings, by our lungs, by our fingers, by our arms, the drums, They're not powered by electricity or anything.
How does HONK go about, thinking from your role as an organizer, how does HONK go about projecting this sort of message to the people that are maybe just sort of wandering in?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something we always wrestle with, because of course the original conception of the festival was it was a chance for the bands to all get together. The original group was a band here. It still exists and very strong. And they said, let's get all the bands like us to come, and we'll all have a festival together and learn from each other. And then, of course, so many people showed up to watch it, and of course it became such a big spectacle that it was like, but how can we then communicate what we are about? So we have days of action. So, advertised with the HONK, there are days of action, like Friday often is a day of action. We did one around the Fight for 15 for fast food workers, where downtown, 10 bands went into 10 big fast food courts and totally disrupted them with workers, the workers striking and, speaking through megaphones or, mic check, where even better, you don't even need a megaphone. You just, my name is, and then everybody else says, my name is, and then they keep projecting it out. We took over South Station Food Court.
That's huge.
Yeah. I mean, with one band, the Rude Mechanical Orchestra, and a bunch of activists and workers, we just suddenly... We were all sitting in the food court eating French fries and stuff, and all of a sudden there was a sign, a signal, like somebody, to click, 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 and everybody got up and started playing and took over the whole place. And, the security came out in huge force. It's a transportation hub. Yeah. But this is, the 3-day weekend. Columbus Day, as some call it, or Indigenous Peoples Day, as we prefer to call it. And we were, there's a huge crowd of people leaving town, right? And they all come over because there's music. What can they do? They can't, rip, a clarinet out of a woman's hands. There's kind of like, it's music, right? And yet it was, all about the workers. The workers were dancing. The workers were then, saying what they were doing, what they were fighting for. We won $15 an hour in Massachusetts. That was one of the starts of it, was the HONK Day of Action for 15. Yeah, so I mean, now we're heading toward a $15 minimum wage in Massachusetts for all those workers. And so, these things tie together really well, and we try to get that across to people, that if you're going to... And we now have Elm Street. We used to not close the square for traffic, Davis Square. Mm-hmm. And the attitude, it was a good one. It was like, life goes on. We're not here to say today is festival. We just come in and play, and the cars do what they do, we're not going to stop them. City finally said, makes them too nervous to have all these people there. If you have thousands of people there and there's cars like charging. So they started blocking streets off. But we said, well, let's use those streets. So we have like art and politics sort of installations in the street where people learn how to do things like making signs and all kinds of like art, poetry and stuff around politics and, all these like interactive things going on in the closed street. So it isn't just a dead zone or a zone where you have to have a band. It's also a place where people do other kinds of art and politics. So that people get the message that this is what this is about. And that's like the banners, the ones about, everyone needs a home, the planet, the immigrants, the affordable housing. That's to let people know that we have values, that we're fighting for a better world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I know that some of the organizers are it started because they were all in the bands and they wanted this festival gathering place. How do you think your role as a union, like a union director, has helped enhance HONK?
Well, I think it showed what scale this could actually reach. I mean, I think when you're when I was younger and I was more of a bohemian anarchist artist, theater person, I was very political, but I thought of politics in a very kind of from the margins. A union is a big thing. I mean, there are 14% of people who are in families and unions, and they're very progressive things. They're the key thing that keeps some kind of equality, economic equality, often racial equality, because when people of color join a union, they suddenly have equal rights in the workplace, and they're fought for by the union. That was a struggle, too, within the union. But it was, but the results are great, right? And women, in the union get paid equal pay for equal work, right? So, these are incredibly important things. And they have big resources, and people think they have big resources I don't know, they think they're mobbed up or something. I don't know what they think. But actually, unions are the only thing on the left that's really funded by low-wage people, because all our money comes from membership dues and voluntary contributions from the members. So like a union like mine that represents janitors, security guards, hospital orderlies, home care workers, child care workers, and adjunct faculty at one of the most poorly paid people in we have 5,000 adjunct faculty in my union. They pay all the money into the union. All the union's resources come from those folks, from the grassroots, from the people, the membership itself. Nothing. It doesn't come from anywhere else. Everybody else is funded by foundations and rich donors. I mean, I worked for a community organization, Neighbor to Neighbor, and it was great, but we were funded by the left wing of the 1%. I mean, we're funded by the members, but the union is funded by the members, but it has big resources because the members really give generously, and they understand that they have to really underwrite. So we have big actions. We did a big action around healthcare in 2009 when the Tea Party first started, and they were really attacking people on the healthcare idea, having universal healthcare. We did a big action down on the Common with 5,000 people and the bands. And the press was just blown away. I mean, this was a few years into HONK, right? And they said, this was on Labor Day. They said, this doesn't feel like Labor Day. They said, this feels like Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
And then we marched down, to Copley, down Boylston Street, with everybody dancing, 5,000 people dancing down the street with bands playing interspersed throughout them and at the front. That was like a real revelation to everybody, that we could be like a big movement, and that music would make it bigger, but unions make it bigger. Like we're pulling together these big organizations with the music is really exciting, and it is also very revolutionary, because what our demands were to end this growing inequality, that we need universal health care, we need universal child care, we need free college, a better world is possible, and that excited people a great deal, I think, that to see the scale we could do it on, and how much the bands, a band of 20 people feels actually commensurable with a crowd of 1,000, and that throws people off, that actually a band has that kind of power. An acoustic band, with brass and drums, has that kind of power, the power of like 1,000 people marching.
Yeah.
So it like having, 4 bands and 4,000 people is like having 8,000 people. It just it amplifies the whole thing. It makes it feel, and it makes it joyous, because then all the people watching are applauding. They might not even, quite understand what you're marching for, but they pay attention because of the music, and then they find out what you're marching for. and they see something positive there. They don't see something aggressive, just like an army on the march. They see art on the march.
Yeah, no, it's kind of beautiful how it can come to this place of joy instead of, like, say, anger too.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, you can't just be politics of resentment. You have to be politics of, and I agree with that completely. I mean, I'm an Epicurean. I believe in, and I've been impressed by people who say, I don't tell people you should want environmental, sustainable transportation because it's right and moral, because it's, more economically just for people who can't afford a car. It's more environmentally just because it doesn't pollute. I say, I show you the picture of my, what I've done in Bogota, the mayor of Bogota, Colombia, with Peñalosa. He was like, I show you what I did with bus rapid transit, bike lanes, pedestrian zones. And I say, doesn't that make you happier?
Yeah.
He said, if the answer to that is not yes, then I haven't done the right thing. He said, that's what I just say it's about happiness. I don't say it's about righteousness. And
that's like the attitude you bring to your job too.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. If you don't enjoy political activism, you shouldn't do it. You're sending the wrong message. You should send joy when you do it. I mean, I love, the theater of my work. I love the work, and I love the meaning of it. I mean, that's what, Epicurus, you say Epicurean, you imagine some guy like eating lobster and champagne and all. But actually, Epicurus said what makes people happiest is doing something righteous with other people. It's companionship, friendship. And that's what's happy. And, if you eat well while you're doing that, all the better.
Absolutely.
Don't need to have watered down cabbage soup after the revolution, right? Don't have to stop dancing after the revolution. That was the Puritan Revolution, which, did found this country in some ways, the Pilgrims. But we've moved beyond that. And we're actually tapping into something, again, that we have to, which is, that aggression can also be a joyous thing. It doesn't have to be a violent, negative thing.
Absolutely. I mean, thinking back to maybe some of the stuff you said prior to that about, like, how these bands can, like, feel like so much more than they are. What do you think, like, the role of space plays in the festival itself? Like, do you think this could happen anywhere else, or does it think it's like this is like in Somerville is like where it's like meant to be? Well,
that's a very good question because, of course, I'm very interested in space as a theater person, and as also a theater person, like a guerrilla theater person, a person who believed in using the streets for theater. There are obviously better places to perform in than others, and the Davis Square is a really amazing place to do it because there are all these sort of natural venues close enough to each other that people can just saunter between them and feel like they're just surrounded by music and activity, and yet enough like sort of spatial separation that each band has its own like atmosphere it creates. That's great. I mean, the Davis Square is amazing, but I see it in Harvard Square too. How many times we just take over spaces. Like this year, we didn't plan to use some of the spaces we sometimes do, and then some of the bands said, "But I want to play more." And I said, "Well, come on!" I got a megaphone, and I just start shouting, "Make way, make way!" We go down to Elliott Triangle, which is a wonderful natural stage for that, and start playing. And suddenly, there's a big crowd because there's a big crowd in the square. They all come over and start dancing and watching. And so I think it's both. It cuts both ways. You can intervene in any space and make it something special. Even the ICE detention center, the Germans said, for example, they said, "Boy, is that an alienating place." Like here we were in Davis Square and in Harvard Square, and we were, going downtown, and everything seemed wonderful in America until we went to the ICE detention center. We were like, this is America too.
Yeah.
Horrible. And yet, because the bands were playing and the people were, so moved by that and reacting to it and reaching out to them, and they were reaching into them, the space became magical. So you can, the bands transform space as much as space allows the bands. So, I mean, one of my biggest mentors was David Harvey, the professor of geography at Hopkins for many years. He, very left-wing guy. I mean, he was a famous Marxist and so on, but he was a Marxist geographer. And he used to, but he wrote books like, Spaces of Hope, about urban space and how it was important to movements like the French, Paris Commune or something, or to the Situationists or to, all these like urban movements for liberation, how the urban space is like part of that. And I think HONK festival, and honk bands use urban space perfectly. They interact with urban space the way they wrote about it in the pattern language. I don't know if you know that book, but it's a famous architectural guide by these very utopian international group of architects and thinkers who wrote about everything from urban planning down to how you should design a balcony on the second floor of a house. I mean, it's called the pattern language because it talks about the patterns that everybody developed over the millennia to make really human life possible, really social life possible. And they talk about piazzas and squares and how they function in urban settings and how they either function well or badly by how they're designed. Like the City Hall Plaza down in Boston is a catastrophe in a way that way, right? It's really hard to tame that space
Absolutely.
for social life. Whereas you go into any normal piazza in Italy and it's like perfect for social life, right? And Davis Square is kind of perfect for social life. So, finding that combination is very key. And I think the bands, they talk about bands in that book. I think these, and brass bands, village bands, where my wife's from in Italy, the band, when she was young, they still had bands that played all the time. They were just amateurs who played very well, and they played, tangos and waltzes and polkas, and everybody danced in the streets. And it was all acoustic, and it was all very, very community building. So I think that the bands play a big role in urban space, and urban space is what makes bands, their intervention possible.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, I mean, how have you seen honk evolve over the years?
Well, I mean, it's a sort of funny thing. I mean, on the one hand, like I said, when I found it, it was like I arrived in utopia, like I came to heaven or something. I mean, in a way, it was all there already. Just that one band playing in Statue Park in the center of Davis Square, playing that kind of music and then their crazy costumes and everything. That was enough. I was like, okay, I've seen everything I needed to see in life. And yet, of course, I hadn't. There was much more to do. But it's all built out of that. I mean, I will say the original founders tapped into something millennia old that is so human and so needed by human beings that it just satisfies like nothing else. What we've developed is to make it more explicitly activist, use it to make a year-round culture of engagement in in Boston. The bands play all year round, and in all these other places. Some of these bands come here, and of course, their idea being an activist band is to play at a community festival. We show them that they could play at the detention center, or we show that they could play on a strike line, and they're like, "Wow, I'm going back to Marseille or to Berlin, and I'm going to do that." So we are showing people possibilities they didn't know. And it's not just musical possibilities, because clearly everybody learns from each other about musical possibilities. I mean, one of the beauties, too, is there's no copyright here. I mean, people come and hear a song. Next year, you'll hear other bands play that song, because they say, wow, that's a good song for, playing out, gets people really into it. So I think it's evolved, but it evolved from an idea that was so basic that it isn't qualitatively that different. It's just kind of quantitatively different.
Yeah.
And has more reach. Now, what's evolved is now, like I said, people take this stuff back to their own towns, and now there are honk festivals all over. Ours was the first, but now there's a honk festival in Austin and in Seattle, and there's one in Australia, and there's two in Brazil now.
Wow.
And the Berlin band said they May 1st next year, Honk Berlin. So, and then there are festivals like Honk, now in Italy and, other parts of, where bands have come from here, and they brought back that idea of a festival about those kind of bands. Yeah. And so, we're tapping into a long tradition of festivals, but also sort of creating a new festival. I mean, if you go on, Wikipedia, you have second line culture, and it says in New Orleans this, New Orleans that. And at the very end of the article, it says, and in Somerville. Because Somerville, in some ways, took that idea and even sort of gave it a new kind of multicultural feel to it. Because it's the New Orleans culture. We always bring a band from New Orleans, from the lower Ninth Ward, usually. A real grassroots band from, like the Young Fellas or the New Creations. Every year we bring a band, or the Red Flame Hunters who do the dancing with the the costumes and everything. We bring a band, that's really the origins of this culture in New Orleans every year to the festival. Yeah. But the festival then brings together so many other cultures. It's amazing.
Is are the organizers like intentionally trying to like spread this and like have like the bands be like, okay, cool, we're doing it here, but then like go off and do your own thing too, or is that just like sort of just like something that's just like happened by?
Well, it's not. It's not proselytized. It's leading by example. It's like saying, here are things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you want to do.
Don't make your own change.
Yeah, do what you want to do. Whatever works for you.
Yeah.
It's not. There's no pushing out of ideas here. Really, it's more like saying, we like this idea. What's your idea? Now, it's true. If somebody says, I'm doing a honk festival, we like to think that it matches somewhat our honk festival, and they have variations. Some places it's harder to set up the space the way we have it at Davis Square. New York has a lot of trouble with space because it's very competitive in New York to use space. But in Providence, Rhode Island, which does a festival right at with the same bands, they go down and play Pronk, we call it, in Providence. That's become a big festival like ours that's very in the streets, and really cohesive. The New York is less cohesive because of the way New York is, and they try to organize as best they can, but that's a tough one. But, they're aspiring to do something like we're doing, and of course they will succeed in doing things that are worth doing. A lot of good New York bands that come up for our festival. So they're clearly inspiring each other all year round. So, in some ways, and the other thing I think is very important is Kevin Lepman, one of the original organizers, started the School of Honk, which is kind of amazing. It's this Sunday afternoons, every Sunday afternoon, people get together. It's now like 150 people get together and play like a band. And they're people who never played music before, a lot of them. They come, they say, come in and if you bring a trombone or we'll give you a trombone. Bring a drum or we'll give you a drum. Or if you don't want to play music, you dance. And they've created this band. It's one of the best bands I've ever seen out of people completely amateur and completely just turned on by the Honk Festival to try and do music. And they play incredible stuff. Kevin has a genius, and his people who collaborate with him have a genius about how to get people playing music right on day one, right off the bat, how you can be part of a band, how you can make music together. And it's been very inspiring for people. And, hundreds of people have been through that School of Honk. And that came out of the Honk Festival.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Are those sort of ideas of like inclusion and unity like really important to Honk?
Well, very much. I think one thing we never feel we do enough on is diversity, racial diversity, because obviously the people who started it, what you would notice is a kind of sociological cohesion of like bohemians, right, which tend to be more white than other races and tend to be more educated often than other people, because they're the classic bohemians, right? They're like offbeat people, artists. So it's been a big goal to reach out to other cultures, and one way to do that is, of course, the bands themselves diversify and bring in individuals. The other is to bring in bands that really represent other cultures, like the Haitian bands now always play with us, the rah-rah bands. Well, they're 100% Haitian. They play instruments that are basically made from like construction site materials, horns and things made from like tubing and stuff. It's a very interesting culture, and very like a very culture of incredible richness coming out of incredible poverty, and it's of course Haiti, which is one of the most hard-hit nations in the world, and one that we really owe actually incredible debt to because of how we treated them. The whole West treated Haiti. It was the only successful slave revolution in the history of the world, and we punished them ever since. And we extracted reparations. France demanded reparations for 100 years for slave owners. So and we supported that. We backed that up in the United States. I think it's great to have bands like that there, the Brazilian bands, to get more of the even street culture. We actually have the Afro-Brazilian bands from here who are really playing the traditional street, drumming of Brazil, but bring up, we've been looking to bringing bands from Africa and South America more, Chile and Argentina, Nicaragua, Mexico. There's a lot we could do to diversify more in that way, and we want to, and we look at that, very seriously. But the inclusion also is age. I think that's one of the most amazing things. We have people playing who are, kids. We have people playing who are, elderly, and everything in between, and playing music that appeals to every age, the same way it would be in a traditional culture where people get together across generations, not just by generation, because in our culture, the most segregated thing actually is age. You hang out with your age group. That's the most, probably the biggest change in history is that in most cultures before, our time, before the 20th century anyway, people hung out by gender. Now that's, that's its pluses and minuses. I mean, I'm glad we don't just hang out by gender. But, little boys, men, old men, they were all together. Little girls, women, old women, all together. And then in our time, instead, it's like 20-year-olds are together, 10-year-olds are together, 20-year-olds are together, 50-year-olds are together, retired people are together, and not with each other. And that's even worse, I think. So we're saying no, let's bring everybody together, and music is the great lubricant for that. It makes everybody possible to be together because everybody likes music, and they're amazed at each other's music, and positively amazed, right? Because I mean, even some of the worst bigots in the world love jazz, they love hip hop music, right? I mean, they can't help themselves. They wish they didn't like it, but they do, and I think that's very important. That's why I love the music.
Absolutely. So, do you think that is honk just for everybody? Like, is there no specific group you're targeting? Like, is it kind of I was going to ask who is honk for, but it sounds like it's sort of just for everybody and breaking down those sort of.
Yeah, I think there, sometimes, we get, like anything that's trying to do multiple things at the same time, there are disagreements about what they, where you draw the line, so to speak. Not on who comes in. Everybody's welcome in. If they want to be in, they're in. But, for example, bands. Does the band have to be, what does it mean to be activist? Is it enough that they play for, their neighborhood block parties? Or is it enough or do they have to play for, saving the planet or, for, racial justice or something. I would say I err on the side of I want all of that there. I don't think there is a dividing line between those things. I want all of that there. And I want people to come in who aren't ready to buy the whole activist thing. Audience members and band members who think it's okay, I'm not going to throw a fit, but I'm here because I like the music. Or I'm here because, I'm here for the community or the music. And then, it becomes part of that. And, I am an ideological person. I have very strong opinions about politics, but I don't believe that, I want to reach out. I'm an organizer. An organizer organizes the unorganized. It doesn't organize the people, it doesn't play to the choir, right? The choir is organized by definition. I want to play to the people who, that's like my daughter's point. I want an intervention where I can show people, here's what I'm about. And, if you like it, great. Or if you want to talk about it, great. We don't have to agree on everything. But, yeah, obviously, we live in very polarized times, and I don't mind if somebody's offended because we're, against racism or fascism or something, that's too bad. But on the other hand, I don't want to say you have to be already, one of the converted to come here. Not at all. And so I love it when people come and just say, it's a party, it's a carnival, it's Mardi Gras. I said, that's enough. That's enough, because that too to me is political. That too is of great meaning. Like I was saying, there's a great meaning even to how we deal with our the biggest danger to us, which is our own aggression, our own desire to make a bonfire of our resources. That's killing us.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to kill us.
Absolutely. Do you have the current, has honk always been kind of shaped by the political state that's surrounding it, thinking about big events like the Iraq War and the financial crisis?
Well, definitely. I think the Iraq War, had a big effect on the original honk, was partly driven by that. But partly because the bands themselves, at least the first ones, formed in reaction to that. Second Line and here and Brass Liberation Orchestra in the Bay Area, and a lot of them were very, very much driven by the Iraq War to take action. That was a very galvanizing thing, to sort of be an activist band. So yeah, that is a context, but but we don't want to. The context is bigger than that. The context For me, the context is my understanding of capital, which is very destructive. We live in a system where we're not emancipated. It's about emancipation. How do we emancipate ourselves from a system that forces us to work at meaningless things, forces us to work out of fear, forces us to destroy the environment, forces us to enslave other people. That's not emancipation. Even if you're on top, you're a prisoner. Even if you're in the 1%, you're a prisoner. So, I would say that that's always the context. And HONK is as deep as that negative thing is deep. HONK is as deep about positive things in the human spirit. It's not just about the issue du jour. It's about a much bigger thing than that, which is community, non-commercial, non-monetized culture. It's a non-commercial festival, and that I think is amazing. And one of the most amazing things is the hosting of the bands. That we host 600 band members from around the world for free in people's homes. And people have incredible connections with the bands, and they become friends, some of them for life. They host each other. When the people go to other places, they stay with the band they hosted. They stay with their members. When I go to London, I stay with the British band that I hosted. When I go to New York, I can stay with the band members in New York. I can go to anywhere in the country and find people who are have been involved in the HONK festival. And that, is a kind of cultural thing of sharing, not treating everything as a cash transaction. And, to do something on that scale with that little commercialism and that little even just outlay of money is amazing. There's an outlay of money, it costs money to do it. We try to help the bands. The main thing we do is try to help the bands pay for their travel here. But we don't pay the bands. We just pay like part of their airfare, part of their bus fare, whatever it took to get them here. And so we raise money mainly for that. That's so that there's even less outlay of money in a funny way. There's less, need for people to pay to do it. But I think the hosting is huge. Think how much it would cost to host 600 people here in this area commercially, like in hotels or Airbnb or whatever. It'd be a fortune. Yeah. And instead it's free, and people feed them and they host them and they have a great time. At my house I had the German band this year from Berlin, from East Berlin. My wife and I met in East Berlin in 1983 at the Humboldt University. This band was formed in 1986 at East Berlin. So some of them are old enough to be, they lived there when we were there. My wife's Italian, but we were both at the Humboldt. And it was like, for us, of course, it was incredibly nostalgic. For them, too, because they recognized people who knew their city before it was even, part of the West, before it was part of West Germany. And we could all joke together, too, like we all from a place that no longer exists. They were literally from a place that no longer exists. We met in a place that, it's kind of magical. It's like a fairy tale. One of them said it's ein Märchen. That means a fairy tale in German. And we just had like the Stammtisch, as they call it in German, where everybody sits around a big table, like our dining room table, and just, drinks beer and talks politics and, shares stories. And that went on for like 4 days. In between all the playing and marching around and doing all these things, there was like a nonstop Stammtisch in my house, and it was wonderful. And that was happening in, 50, 60 houses around Somerville and Cambridge.
It's amazing how large scale it seems like people have just bought into this.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Yeah, I know. All these hosts are like organizers of the festival. Because you think about what they do for people. They sometimes take them around, show them things. They cook for them. They they put them up in often very nice places, or at least share like all their living situation, and it's an adventure that these bands who have not been to it before are just amazed at what the generosity. And we on our side are amazed at their generosity. They're coming here often, at some expense to themselves, to then put out incredible talent and energy for our community. So, the reciprocity of it is intense.
Yeah, has there been any significant pushback? Like, I mean, it sounds like a lot of people are buying into this idea, like the community loves it and supports it and is behind it, but have you faced any more challenges? Like, what have been some of the more difficult aspects of being an organizer of this?
Well, I think one of the most difficult aspects is that it was sort of what I was saying before. I mean, how do you have a bacchanalian revel without people actually getting hurt? Yeah. You know, because we don't believe in that. We don't believe in people being sexually or physically abused by other people. When people let their hair down, so to speak, sometimes they get kind of wild, and sometimes real aggression comes out, you know, the wrong kind of aggression. We've had to, adjudicate and mediate conflicts between people who felt they were, mistreated by each other. Because anytime you bring 1,000 people together, anything could happen. I think it's amazing how little anything like that happens. But that it happens means, you have to actually play a great role in de-escalating, but also treating things seriously. And I think in that way, as an organizer, we can't just be kids, we have to be grown-ups too. With this festival. Absolutely. And so I think we've handled some very difficult situations decently, but it's a learning experience, like it has been in a trade union, like it is in politics, like it is in, being on the board of a nonprofit. There's always conflict. So I think human conflict, personal conflicts between people can be intense. How can you have people like all, doing what they want to do, like, smoking the weed they want to smoke, drinking the drinks they want to drink, and not get, over the edge, where they actually hurt somebody or themselves. You have to strike a balance there. It's a tough one because I do believe in the wildness of it. So for me particularly, I think it's a struggle to find the right balance. I think some people just would err on the side of trying to control people's behavior. Some people would err on the side of not doing anything about it. I think though the committee, the organizers, it feels very much both ways. How can people really be free but not impinge on someone else's freedom? Yeah. Because we do believe in, that people deserve to be treated with respect. So I'd say that often is the most challenging thing, because that's really the grown-up role of trying to, go wild and not lose your awareness of what people need.
Absolutely.
Not lose your empathy and your caring. That's the thing that Bataille was, of course, troubled by. Maybe you can't do that. Yeah. I like to think you can, but it's not easy sometimes.
What do you think HONK will look like in, say, 10 years?
Well, I have no idea. Nobody thought it would become this, even. It's a truly spontaneous thing that found, that just like I wandered and said, this is what I've been waiting for all my life. I mean, obviously thousands of people walked in and said that in different ways. And at different levels of commitment. I don't know. I think the important thing is that, we reestablish a connection to the traditional cultures that are so deep in us. This need for music, this need for acoustic music, this need for street-level music, this need for non-commercial community and art. I think... that will keep finding new ways to express itself, like School of HONK, right? You could have School of HONK and no HONK festival. You could have people doing activist street band culture everywhere, we've had bands from, and no HONK culture, no HONK festival anywhere. Because the HONK festival was, in a way, the original thing to, focus attention on this and make it really visceral to people. And if we... keep doing that, that's great, because it is, for a lot of people, it's their high holy days. I'm of Jewish background. The Maccabees would string me up because, I've become an Epicurean. While everybody else doing Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, I'm doing HONK Festival. I mean, it's after that. We don't overlap ever out of respect for that culture. But for me, the true high holy days are an Epicurean festival, not a... That's what the Maccabees were fighting, the Epicurean Greeks. Ironically, that's because they too were like the Puritans. They were very righteous, but they were very puritanical. There was an orthodoxy, and we're not an orthodoxy. We're an orthodoxy of no orthodoxy, and that some people aren't going to like that. But we're not impinging on anybody about that. We're not forcing anybody to do it. So I think people want the HONK Festival, and they like it. It may change, but I have to say, every time we make a change, the people say, actually, I want it the way it was.
Yeah.
Like I miss whatever it is you stopped doing. I might like what you added, but I miss what you stopped doing. And that shows there's a deep need for repetition in people. They want to know. It's like Christmas, right? You can't say Christmas isn't happening this year. Like next year. This year we're calling it off. Or I mean, Thanksgiving, whatever, or Yom Kippur, right? I mean, you can't just say we're not doing it this year. If it's a ritual that appeals to people that much, they say I don't want to give it up, and I don't want anything missing from it. I want the bitter herb on the Seder plate. Like don't take it away. I'd miss it if you took it away. If we don't sing Dayenu, I'll miss it. So it's the same thing with honk. We didn't play in the venues in Harvard this year. We just played on the main stage and had workshops in the Common. Not a lot of people say, like, because then I brought a band over to play at Elliott Triangle, and then all the bands started going to Elliott Triangle to play, and people were like, where are the other venues? I love the venues. I love going over to, Charlie's Kitchen and the alley behind the coop and everything, and there's nobody playing there this year. So every time we make a change, people say, I miss it, I miss the ritual. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a very strong conservative tendency in honk people to give people what they want. They want it's only once a year. I want it every year, and I want what I love about it every year. And that, I think, is very interesting. It's very hard to change it because it was so perfect that any change, people say, is less.
Yeah.
Because they loved it, and I love that. I mean, I've become very much, we can add day of action, we can add workshops, but we can't take away the venues, we can't take away the performance, we can't take away the street music, ever, even in part, without people noticing it.
What does honk mean to you? It's kind of a broad question, I know. But.
Yes, well, it's a funny name. I love the Cantastoria we do. John Bell and he's he's a puppeteer. He's one of the masterminds of this thing. He and others, Trudy Cohen, his partner, they put together this Cantastoria, which means you tell a story with like tapestries, where you tell the story and you keep changing the tapestry. It's an old way of doing like a film back in the in the Middle Ages. Yeah. And they do one on honk. What is honk? And it's very simple and yet profound, I think. They start with geese honk because they're geese. And that's how when they're alone, when they get lost from the flock, they honk to let the others know, I'm here, come join me. And then they go to cars honk because they're cars. Cars honk to say, get out of my way. And then they say, and horns honk, like saxophones and trumpets and all, and by honking together, we make a beautiful thing. So they go from a positive to a negative to a positive of the idea of honking as something very basic. Of course, again, to that aggression, right, in the sense of the cars and the horns, But look at the difference between the aggression. The one is get out of my way. The other is come join me. And I think that's, Fellini has that in one of his, in La Strada, I think it is. They see it, they hear music, and then they see, one person walking down the street playing a clarinet, and then a trumpeter joins them, and all things. And eventually you go into a square, and it's the honk festival. It's a giant carnival in the square of the town with, hundreds of musicians and acrobats and people doing all kinds of things, So honk is like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. It like pulls us all together, in this incredible way. So I understand why it is the name of our festival.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you want to add, but would better help me understand what honk is and what your role is? The last question.
I don't know. I'm like, I don't know if you ever saw the old movie with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, The Have and Have Not, based on a great Hemingway novel, To Have and Have Not, I think his best novel. At one point, somebody turns to Lauren Bacall. Now, Lauren Bacall is a personality, right? Beautiful, but incredibly offbeat, interesting-looking person, really powerful woman. And they say to Lauren Bacall at some point, this is during World War II, somebody turns to her and says, like suspiciously, who are you, And she goes, I'm just another volunteer. And I'm like, that's what we all are. I'm just another volunteer.
I love that. That's phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you so much for everything.
Yep. You
I
can
am.
keep this if you want.
Oh yeah, no, that'd be
Straight
great.
or
Yeah,
something.
we have to. It's an interesting project. We have to turn it into like. We have to like. To submit like the whole thing like unedited, and then we also have to like make some like clips using like photos we took at HONK, and just like make like shorter clips that like tell a story. And
Well, share whatever you do with
of
me.
course,
I'd
of
love
course.
to see it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was great. This
Okay.
Was
Good.
Yeah, this
What
was
you wanted?
phenomenal. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
You got what you wanted?
Thank you for taking time out of your busy day too.
Another
I
satisfied
know this is
customer.
in such a cool class too.
Yeah, I bet. What's the class exactly?
Do I just leave? Do you think? Is this how this works? Like,
Yeah, right. And we have to be quiet when we leave.
I think they're done.
Oh, that's a funny story. Actually, we brought a band from Italy. They said, "Well, let them play at Harvard." You know, like to have them play for you because the Italian department said, "Yeah, bring them onto the campus." So they come on campus, start playing in the middle of the the quad there, the yard, and everybody's like, "That's too loud," like you can't play music like that. So then instead, what they did is they went all around the quad, the yard. I'm thinking my college, Hopkins. They all went all around with their instruments going.
It's actually I play in the I play in the band here. So one of like the marching band type, scouter band type thing.
Yeah.
So I play the sporting games, and after every game we like will like go into the yard to like play at the statue, and we always like enter the yard and we're like.
Okay.
And then we play like our like alma mater in front of the statue.
Band from
Bologna
Bologna came here and they did the same thing.
We also do it in the library during final. During